Welcome to Whistle Where You Work. I'm Mark Cohen of the Government Accountability Project. Today, let's talk about food, like peanut butter. Who is looking out to make sure our food is safe to eat? If you're expecting to find a streamlined, efficient regulatory machine, you've come to the wrong country. Get this for a patchwork system. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, regulates salmon and tuna. But the USDA, that's the Agriculture Department, it regulates catfish. A weird anomaly? Well, the USDA regulates open-faced sandwiches while the FDA handles sandwiches with 2 slices of bread. I kid you not. Got a problem with frozen cheese pizza? Tell it to the FDA. Got a problem with frozen pepperoni pizza? Take it up with USDA. When at least 15 agencies are regulating food, is anyone really in charge? Let's ask Steve Clapp, senior editor and reporter with Food Chemical News, and Tony Corbo with the food campaign of the nonprofit Food and Water Watch. Welcome to Whistle Where You Work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, let's start with you. We've had a raft of food safety problems recently. Right now it's peanuts. A few months ago it was melamine, an industrial solvent that got into food somehow. Is it the fact that there are a lot more food safety issues right now, or are we just hearing more about them?
Well, there definitely are more food safety issues. I was covering a meeting a couple of months ago where Andrew von Eschenbach, the Associate FDA Commissioner for Food, was commenting on the peanut butter and some of the other scandals, saying, you know, it used to be we didn't have to worry about these things. We could take it for granted that they were safe, but that's no longer the case. And so this has created a climate where there is a lot of pressure for food reform legislation.
And Tony, are we looking at episodic problems, or is there something systemic going on here?
Well, I think it's becoming systemic, especially on the FDA side of the equation, because they have been so starved for resources and do not, the agency itself does not have the inspection personnel to adequately cover the 150,000 establishments that are allegedly registered with the FDA as being part of their jurisdiction.
And Steve, how has industry responded, or have they responded to this spate of news about food safety scandals?
Well, actually, they've responded rather positively, I would say. The Grocery Manufacturers Association, which is the large umbrella trade association for most of the industry, especially the large brand companies, they submitted a food safety wish list to the Obama transition team even before President Obama took office. And some of the things that they wished for, including more money for FDA, are embedded in some of this legislation that's been proposed.
Okay, we have a patchwork system, Tony, of food safety regulation. And I mentioned some bizarre examples in my introduction. Is there a regulatory scheme, as it were, for food safety in the U.S.?
There's not one regulatory scheme. There are several. And so you have USDA that regulates meat and poultry products, and you mentioned catfish. That's a new addition to USDA's jurisdiction, which comprises about 20% of the food supply. The other 80% is regulated by FDA. And if you look at the way the resources are allocated, the USDA food safety budget for the Food Safety and Inspection Service is about $1 billion. And they have about 7,400 inspectors. And because of the way the statutes are written, the Federal Meat Inspection Act and the Poultry Products Inspection Act, inspectors are supposed to be in those plants on a daily basis. Whenever they operate, the inspectors are to be there.
All day long?
Well, it depends. If you're slaughtering animals, they are to be there at all times. If they're processing, if they're grinding hamburger meat, for example, they're to be there on a daily basis or on every shift of production to check the records of the company.
And are they?
And well, there are actually shortages. I mean, there are inspector shortages, and we have actually discovered cases where one inspector, a processing inspector, had 20 plants to visit because of the fact that they didn't have enough inspectors in the Philadelphia district of the Food Safety Inspection Service. So obviously that was not occurring, and our organization especially has been on top of the agency and also the Congress to make sure that those inspection vacancies are filled. On the FDA side of the equation, you're lucky to get an inspection every 5 to 10 years for the 80% of the food supply that they're to regulate. And that's the mismatch in resources. And also on the FDA side, they don't have the same authority as the FSIS USDA inspectors do. If problems become egregious enough in the meat or poultry industry, they withdraw inspection. The agency, the USDA can withdraw inspection, which means the plant cannot operate. FDA does not have the same authority. So there is a mismatch of authorities. There's a mismatch of resources, mismatch in the number of inspectors, and so you have a very crazy system right now to regulate food.
Well, Steve, let's talk about some proposals to correct that crazy system. Senator Durbin from Illinois has a bill. Congresswoman DeLauro from Connecticut has a bill, both of which are intended to improve food safety. I believe that Secretary of Agriculture Vilsack has indicated that he supports the underlying motivation of the DeLauro bill, which would create an independent food safety agency that would have overall regulatory authority for all food safety issues. Isn't that right?
Well, not yet. Her bill would separate the food side of FDA out from the drug side and create something that she would call a food safety administration. And that way, she hopes to avoid the historical turf wars between FDA and USDA, and lest we forget, between the agriculture committees in Congress and the other committees that regulate or have jurisdiction over FDA. Now, Congresswoman DeLauro is in a unique circumstance. She's the chair of the House Appropriations FDA USDA subcommittee, so she holds the purse strings for both agencies. I'm old enough to remember when the person who held that post was named Jamie Whitten, and he was called the real Secretary of Agriculture because he could get you funded or not. And there's a USDA building that bears his name now. So she occupies a fairly powerful position.
Well, what exactly is she proposing? She's proposing to create this food safety agency that would be separate from the FDA.
Right.
Would that be inclusive? Would its authority be inclusive of what USDA currently has authority over?
Not yet. Her ultimate goal is a single food safety agency, but she wants to do this in a sort of stepwise fashion. She thinks what she's suggesting is politically possible and easier than trying to put it all under one basket at this time.
And what is Senator Durbin proposing?
Well, he's proposing changes within what FDA does now, and he has a lot of support from the food industry because it is his approach is even more incremental than Rosa DeLauro's.
And what exactly is he proposing that would enhance food safety?
Well, he's proposing asking for food requiring that companies have food safety plans. He's requiring stepped-up inspection, I believe, on a risk-based basis. Tony here probably is more familiar with the details of the bill than I am, but as I say, the industry likes the Durbin bill, and they've kind of chimed in together from the Grocery Manufacturers Association to individual companies. They're all saying, this is what's needed now.
Okay, Tony, what is in that Durbin bill, and it would increase the amount of inspections.
Well, it would require that so-called high-risk plants be visited at least on an annual basis, and the lower-risk plants every 4 years. Contrasting that to Rosa DeLauro's bill, H.R. 875, she prescribes a schedule. The riskiest plants, and those are actually, the FDA does regulate some animal slaughter. It's, if they're not dealing with cows or catfish or chickens, it's actually FDA's responsibility.
What animals are left there?
Well, for example, there was actually a recent recall of elk meat that FDA issued because it was found to be contaminated with chronic wasting disease, and so they recalled the product. So her bill requires that if you're slaughtering an animal, you have to have continuous inspection. That means an FDA inspector has to be there at all times. Very comparable to what the USDA side of the ledger now requires for cattle and poultry. And then she has a schedule going down to food warehouses where they have to be visited at least annually. So the bare minimum she has for inspection visits is an annual basis, all the way up to requiring inspector to be there at all times. And the other thing that she does that differs from some of the other legislation that has been introduced is that she does pull the food part out and creates a Food Safety Administration that has line authority over the budget, all of the personnel, and the inspection personnel. Because right now FDA is divided up in 4 different ways in terms of how food inspections get done, or food policy gets done at FDA. And so she's trying to pull all that together and create a separate entity within the Department of Health and Human Services, and in a lot of ways would mirror what goes on at USDA. So if the ultimate goal is to create a single food safety agency, she is taking this step of trying to make the systems comparable and actually have a preventative inspection policy, which is more reflective of what USDA does. Right now, FDA reacts to everything. It's like a fire department. There's a food crisis. The latest one is the peanut butter. They didn't know that there was contamination going on until people started to die and get sick.
Steve, I would think that from an industry standpoint, that is, the good actors in industry, those who want to maintain high standards because they want people to have confidence in the safety of their food, that they would want very rigorous inspections. They would want very rigorous national standards so that people would feel confident that when they buy these products that, in fact, they're good, and that it would keep the bad actors, the ones cutting corners and cheating the system and getting competitive advantage, out of the way.
Well, I think they've come around to that point of view. I think the large firms would say that many of the things in the Durbin Bill reflect what they're already doing themselves. And it's these bad actors like that Peanut Corporation of America and some of the others. And, of course, these nightmarish problems with melamine coming in from China. They're very concerned about their brands, and that makes them very receptive to these reforms.
Tony, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, for instance, says that a single food agency, a food safety agency, would be a new bureaucracy. It would squander tax dollars that would be better spent on hiring inspectors at FDA, on increasing the rigor of the food safety system within the context of the current structure that is given. Doesn't that make sense?
Well, the thing is that I think you're going to have to correct both systems before you even move to the single food safety agency. There is some merit to their argument because there is a disparate approach to the way food is inspected both at FDA and at USDA, but it's become very obvious that something has to change, and eventually you may move toward a single food safety agency in order to put some rationality to the way foods are inspected across the board in this country.
Well, many thanks to Tony Corbo of Food and Water Watch and Steve Clapp of Food Chemical News for joining us to discuss the state of food safety in the U.S. and what might be done about it. When we return, a whistleblower's story. Welcome back to Whistle Where You Work. I'm Mark Cohen, and with me is Dr. Jim Murtagh. And Dr. Murtagh has a remarkable story that he is not at liberty to share with you in its entirety because it's under court seal. However, the issues underlying his concerns are very much on display, and we want to talk about them today. Dr. Murtagh, welcome for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
The big issue that you're concerned with is called peer review. But before we do that, let's establish who you are.
Okay.
Where are you from? What's your educational background?
Okay. Mark, I'm from Toledo, Ohio. I grew up in a conservative Catholic family, worked hard, went to Jesu grade school, St. Francis High School, and then on to University of Michigan, where I was in a 6-year medical program that combined my undergraduate and medical degrees. I then went to the National Institutes of Health, where I was a staff scientist, and during very heady days when we were unraveling the genome and discovering how to sequence things. I had one of the first, I don't know if you know the term PCR or polymerase chain reaction, but it became a new tool for us to really use genes to help patients. Now, I think you're asking my background, but also about peer review and why we should be concerned about it.
Let's talk about that. What is it, first of all?
Well, all patients want their hospitals to have boards of safety, that the doctors review each other's work and make sure that everything's by standards.
A good thing, right?
It should be. It should be, yes. And unfortunately, what should be a tool to improve the quality of patient care has been warped by big hospital corporations that have used it to decrease or decimate patient safety.
How did they do that?
Well, back in the days of Marcus Welby might look at another doctor's work and make some suggestions how to improve, and it would be a very collegial thing. Well, Marcus Welby isn't in charge of medicine anymore, so when a big HMO decides they want to practice, they just make a false charge against a doctor, and it happens all the time.
Why would they do that?
Well, if they want something the doctor has, they can have it, because they have what's called unlimited immunity. Now, a lot of people are taken back when they hear the words unlimited immunity, because throughout the centuries, unlimited power has not been a good thing.
Now, tell me what kind of charge, what kind of issues might be immunized?
All charges. A hospital can make any charge against a doctor and have immunity from any review. I'll tell you, when I told the FBI about it, they about fell off their chairs. They did not realize that this was a standard power that a hospital would have. So a friend of mine, Dr. Blake Moore, was charged with drinking at home when he was off duty, and underwent a peer review. They took away his livelihood, There's something called a data bank that also is unlimited in its immunity and can't be challenged.
Now, in order to avail themselves of this unbridled authority, does the hospital have to act through this peer committee?
Actually, that's a very good question. Hospitals have said any review of a doctor, anything they might say, is protected by peer review immunity. That's not what the framers of this peer review statute, in fact it was Henry Waxman, who was a good friend of medical whistleblowers, and he, when passing what was called the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act, or HCQA, he suggested that they were giving too much immunity to the hospitals, but the hospitals wouldn't allow a peer review statute without immunity. So Waxman actually predicted some of the problems that have happened. So let me give you a few examples right now. There's one example at a hospital that I know very well where a doctor took out the wrong eye of a patient, left the patient blind. Well, that doctor was not peer-reviewed. The person who reported the doctor was peer-reviewed.
Who makes the decision who gets peer-reviewed?
Another excellent question. It's the administration of the hospital. Peer review sounds like it's a review of your peers, a trial of your peers or something. It's not. Now it's some executive, and like I said, Marcus Welby is not the executive anymore. Medicine is big business. It's 17% of our economy, and it's ruthless business because market share, a big hospital wants a little hospital. Basically, everyone's health care is controlled by peer review because that's the final safety review of what goes on in your health.
Just so I understand the process, the executive, the hospital executive says, okay, time for peer review.
Right.
That's what triggers a peer review process.
In most cases. Now, there should be something called hospital bylaws, and it should be something different than that. But in practice, that usually is. So it's not going to be the executive's best friend. It's not going to be the big earner of the hospital. It's going to be someone who looks different, a minority, for instance. There's all kinds of reasons that you might want a doctor out of the picture.
Now, just so I understand this process, is it the case that the administration also selects the peers that will review your case?
That's an excellent, yes, exactly. So they hand-pick the people to give the view they want. So the only safeguard that the doctor is allowed is he's supposed to be present and there's supposed to be a stenographer. But he's not allowed to reply to any of the charges. So we know what malpractice is. You go into court, you have a defense. Even if you lose, you go on, you still practice. If you lose a peer review, you lose your ability to practice medicine. 90% of doctors who are peer-reviewed, regardless of result, never practice again. And if you shoot one doctor, the rest of the doctors are all going to get in line with the administration. So we've had whistleblowers amongst hospital executives saying, yes, this is how we control doctors. This is how HCA, for instance, and Humana withheld standard care and killed thousands of patients. That's part of the documented testimony of Linda Pino, who was featured in Michael Moore's Sicko. This is not an uncommon thing.
How prevalent is it?
Well, the doctor, after being peer-reviewed, is completely isolated, broken, and unfortunately there's a lot of suicides too. So how prevalent is it? We need a study. That's why Tom Devine has been pushing for a GAO investigation.
Tom Devine, Legal Director of the Government Accountability Project.
I hope your viewers are well aware. But that is our top demand because, sometimes Congress or someone will say, well, Jim, can't you define the thing? Well, I'm not a huge organization myself. We're trying to build one. But we need an independent group. And by the way, if our doctors group came out with some study about how prevalent it is, it wouldn't be credible. We need an independent group to come in. Now, our group did investigate 1,000 sequential peer reviews that we were able to obtain, and we found out that more than 900 were for bad reasons, for reasons other than protecting the patient quality. So I myself have not seen a good faith peer review. I've seen only bad faith peer reviews. And, you know,
what kind of process, if that's the case, and
Yeah.
if the only kind of peer review is a bad peer review,
Yeah.
what should be done?
Well, we do know what does improve patient care. There's something about continuous quality improvement, recognizing that no one is perfect and that everyone wants to improve. So everyone would love to have their standard of practice evaluated and continuously improve it according to scientific methods. Now, but if you wanted to have a peer review in addition to this system, you need to have rigorous standards, just like any professional review. We're not asking for anything different. You have to have professional reviews of lawyers, of pilots, of police, of soldiers. It's not up to us to invent due process, give everybody the same due process. We have to have a definition of what a bad doctor is. Every doctor makes mistakes. We know what malpractice is. There is no definition. So if you're going to have a trial in Salem and figure out who's a good witch or a bad witch, you first need a definition of a witch. And we just don't have that. I think hospitals should be begging for standards so that they can so that they themselves will know what due process is. Doctors are not lawyers. They shouldn't be doing what the lawyers tell them, but they should follow standards. And I hope I answered your question there.
Many thanks to Dr. Jim Murtagh, whose Semmelweis Society is pressing this issue, critical public issue, about peer review in the medical profession. Many thanks, Doctor.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Whistle Where You Work.